I wanted him to make one for her because there weren't any in Christchurch that we wanted to buy, and I said, you can make it. And when he made it, I thought that was such a beautiful job that he did, so we sort of said, gosh, we could totally sell these. There'd be such a great market in Rolleston and in Christchurch for them. And I knew the importance of allowing children to explore, I guess, these climbing structures and really enjoying that sort of physical and growth motor development. So I was really passionate about sort of getting that started.
Yeah, so it's a climbing thing for toddlers, isn't it? The Pickler Triangle there. And tell us, is this your first business venture? Was it pretty daunting getting a new business off the ground, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, the first one for the both of us. Alex has a building business already, so he's the creator, the handyman. But definitely a little out of my comfort zone. It's not something that I had done before. And, yeah, it was really great having the idea. But, yeah, there's definitely a lot of work that goes into it. And to be honest, we haven't been established for very long. It was just sort of during lockdown, I guess, into level 3, we launched our Facebook page. So it's all really new and really exciting.
Well, all the best for it. And what does New Zealand made and owned mean to you? Because that's really the theme of the series.
Exactly. Yeah, I think New Zealand made and owned is really important. The fact that our product is made just in our home, in our garage, and with a lot of love and thought gone into it, and the product that we have is very sturdy and very safe, and we want our little one to enjoy it, so we're really excited for others in New Zealand to enjoy it as well and have them in their home.
Very, very nice. The Pickler Triangle. Thank you very much, Hayley. Nice to have you on, and all the best. Forward and wonders.
Thank you so much for having us.
Always lovely to hear about just a small company, what starts out as just an idea perhaps. You need a climbing gym, all of a sudden you've got the garage set up, Lizzie, and away you go.
Well, every big, massive company starts with a wild idea, really, doesn't it? So I think it's wonderful. And just seeing that Kiwi ingenuity, finding something that they think, oh, we need one of these, the problem, you've got the problem, then solving the problem, and then thinking, oh, wait, actually, this could have a wider application. I looked at their products. They look really lovely. One thing I would say is they're quite expensive, so it's a bit of an investment there. Yeah.
And in Wanganui, there's quite a few New Zealand owned and made companies as well.
Yeah. There certainly are, and one of the hallmarks is quality, actually. I think it's New Zealand made stuff has generally got a very high quality about it, and they own it. I guess my thought too is, as a career public servant, been in the workforce about 42 years or something now, one thing that always amazes me is the bravery some people have got of taking their savings and putting it into a dream, and then it's all resting on whether people want to come and buy the product, because you can't force them to do it, and that actually has never ceased to really amaze me that Kiwis do that, and good on them.
Indeed. Trying to buy some tools at Bunnings with your husband in tow, most of the time he's the one that gets talked to. It's been wonderful having you both on the panel this Monday. Lizzie Marvley and Chester Burrows, thank you very much.
Thanks,
good to
Wallace.
be here, Wallace.
For your time. Yes, same.
Cheers.
I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint next, back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Te whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, residents at Auckland's Stamford Plaza are threatened with legal action for raising concerns about plans to use the hotel as a managed isolation facility. 2 new COVID cases around the world every second. Fears mount that COVID-19 is growing and not slowing. Australia's state of Victoria looks set to go back into lockdown for up to 2 months. And here in the past hour, the Prime Minister has announced a new health order that includes stricter mandatory testing and tighter rules for ship crews arriving at the border. The ban on cruise ships in New Zealand is also being extended beyond June 30th. And the inns filling up, the government's looking at charging people for part of quarantine.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister has unveiled further measures to boost border protection, saying the world is entering a dangerous phase. A new health order makes it clear anyone arriving in the country must submit to testing and medical examinations and return a negative test before leaving, quarantining and managed isolation. More than $80 million has already been spent on the border regime, and Jacinda Ardern says requiring a contribution is being considered.
I expect that we will be considering as a Cabinet the option of co-payments very shortly, within coming weeks. But what is an absolute bottom line is that quarantine will remain.
Meanwhile, officials are looking at making people returning from overseas stay in their hotel rooms until they test negative. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the changes are being considered with increasing numbers testing positive for the virus.
Where there's a much stricter regime applied at the start of the stay until people have had that first test and it has returned negative before they may be allowed out. We're looking at that. We rely on the distancing and the other protocols which, if you've been to one of these facilities, you'll see are really strictly adhered to.
And Dr Bloomfield confirmed 2 new cases of COVID-19 today, bringing the number of active cases to 9. Both the new cases are recent arrivals who are in managed quarantine. Meanwhile, the government has decided to extend the ban on cruise ships that had been due to expire at the end of the month. The police officer who survived Friday's West Auckland shooting has been discharged from hospital. Constable Matthew Hunt was killed and another officer shot during a routine traffic stop on Friday morning. The surviving officer has now been discharged, but a pedestrian who was hit by the fleeing vehicle remains in hospital. A 24-year-old man and a 30-year-old woman charged in relation to the shooting will appear in the High Court in 2 weeks. Emergency services tried to save a man's hand severed during an attack in the Bay of Plenty town of Taniatua yesterday. Police are investigating the assault, which happened on Mackenzie Street about 2:30 in the afternoon. Matthew Tunison reports.
As well as a severed hand, the 27-year-old man also suffered a serious head injury. He was first taken to Whakatane Hospital before being flown to Waikato for specialist treatment. The rescue helicopter pilot, Liam Brett Kelly, says the severed hand was packed in ice during the trip and the crew had to act fast to give surgeons the best chance of reattaching it. The man is now in a serious but stable condition. The police want to speak to anyone who saw a black Great Wall ute in Taniatua yesterday. This is Matthew Tunison.
A 6-year-old girl saw a GP 4 times in Palmerston North before she was diagnosed with acute rheumatic fever. The Health and Disability Commissioner found the Palms Medical Centre breached its duty of care to the girl. Anthony Hill says the 6-year-old was taken to a doctor 4 times within a month, 3 times to the Palms Medical Centre, but the doctors stopped investigating after X-rays led to nothing. The girl was diagnosed in hospital a week later and was on bed rest there for several months. Mr Hill has recommended the medical centre apologise to the girl's family and consider changing its processes. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff says more jobs will be put at risk if the city's water crisis is not solved. Mr Goff is urging the government to fast-track its 7-year-old request to take an extra 200 megalitres of water from the Waikato River. He says 1,000 jobs have already been affected by the city's current water restrictions.
As soon as you get into summer and we have to have intermittent water supply, that's not only a disaster for households, but 30% of that water is used by industry, in particular the food processing industry and construction industry, and that will put companies and jobs at risk.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. Rain at the weekend in Hawke's Bay is being hailed as a drought breaker, but farmers say the pain is not yet over. The region's Federated Farmers President Jim Galloway says he had 30 to 40 millimetres of rain on his farm. He says it was brilliant to get decent water, but it's not a miracle cure.
From a ground point of view, a drought breaker, but we're so far behind and the pastures are so open that was going to take a lot longer to catch up for grass and stock feed.
Jim Galloway is now hoping for warm temperatures to ensure recovery from the drought. At the same time, Wellington has had just 6 minutes of sunshine over the last week. Met Service says it should be slightly brighter in the capital today and tomorrow, but the dark and gloomy weather is expected to return later this week. A multi-million-dollar upgrade at New Zealand Post will double the number of parcels processed to 190 million a year. NZ Post is building a rugby field-sized super depot in Wellington, which is due to open in 2022. There will also be a new processing centre in Auckland and an upgrade of the Southern Operations Centre in Christchurch. NZ Post Chair Roger Finlay says $18 million will also be spent on new technology at the site.
There's world-leading technology. Our parcels being scanned will tell us so much more than a delivery address. It will absolutely be operating at much faster speeds, so our already high delivery standards will be even further enhanced.
Roger Finlay says the technology will also improve parcel tracking. Just after 5:05. In sport, the Warriors and Kiwis forward Tohu Harris says sacked coach Stephen Kearney was the man holding the Warriors together through their long stint in Australia, and the club's bosses should have looked closer before swinging the axe. Tohu Harris says he wouldn't begrudge any teammate who wanted to return home or at the very least pull out of Friday's match against Melbourne, such as the depth of feeling within the side over Kearney's sacking. He's annoyed the players weren't consulted over the axing but knows they must shoulder the blame. Tohu Harris believes the club owners weren't aware of Stephen Kearney's importance to the players. And the new Wallabies coach, Dave Rennie, has dismissed suggestions he threatened to leave if the former head of Rugby Australia was sacked. Raelene Castle stepped down as chief executive in April after coming under pressure over Rugby Australia's poor results on the field and financial struggles off it. Australian media reports claim Dave Rennie, the former Chiefs coach, was ready to walk away if Castle left. But Rennie says while he'd have loved to have worked with Raelene Castle, he was always committed to coaching the Wallabies. And that's the news.
New details emerge of the police shooting in Massey.
The other police officer was shot at more than a dozen times.
Staff numbers are ramped up to keep track of border arrivals.
This is a government that again and again, when it comes to quarantine, is getting it wrong.
And K-pop stars trump the president.
There is so much omelette on the faces of Donald Trump's senior campaign staff.
Breakfast Radio. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service taking us through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday, for Northland and Auckland, north of the city. Cloudy periods with a few showers. The remainder of Auckland, also western areas, that's from Waikato all the way to Wellington. Fine apart from cloudy areas around Wellington today. Coromandel Peninsula, cloudy periods, isolated showers. Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Fine, cloudy periods from tomorrow afternoon. The chance of a shower about Tauranga. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy. Showers becoming isolated tomorrow afternoon. Waited Upper, mostly cloudy. Patchy drizzle clearing from tomorrow afternoon. For Nelson, fine today. Areas of cloud tomorrow. Coastal Marlborough and Canterbury Plains from Ashburton northwards. Mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle. For the rest of the South Island, mostly fine. Low cloud or fog in some inland valleys. Cloudy periods for coastal Southland from tomorrow afternoon with patchy rain. And to the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. There could be a shower or two there. It's right on 5:08.
Thanks, Paul, and kia ora. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Border protections have been ratcheted up again as New Zealanders continue to return home in droves. It comes after 2 new positive cases today. One is a teenage woman who arrived from Pakistan and was on the same flights from Doha and Melbourne as another confirmed case. The other case is a man in his 30s who has returned from India, again on the same flight as another confirmed case, and is staying at the Grand Millennium. The Prime Minister says with a steady increase in infections overseas, the world is entering a dangerous new phase, with now more than 8 million cases reported globally. She's also flagged the future possibility of people being asked to help cover the cost of their quarantine or managed isolation. The government's admitted to some failings, in particular 2 women being allowed to leave without being tested, then later testing positive. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says a new health order is now in place.
To make it crystal clear that individuals must submit to testing and medical exams, including the potential of multiple tests. It also spells out that for a person to meet the low risk indicator by day 14 in order to leave isolation or quarantine, they are expressly required to submit to a test, and that test must be negative.
And the ban on cruise ships due to expire at the end of the month has been extended by 2 or 3 months.
This order also sets out rules for very specific exceptions, such as cargo vessels being allowed to load and unload, fishing vessels to unload and resupply, and vessels to come to New Zealand to undertake repair and refitting. However, for any vessel in a New Zealand port, crew who are coming into New Zealand must complete a 14-day period of managed isolation here, unless they have been on the boat for more than 28 days.
More than $80 million has already been spent on quarantine and managed isolation facilities, but Ms Ardern says protecting New Zealand through strong border controls is the priority. But Ms Ardern says the government may look to share that cost.
I expect that we will be considering as a cabinet the option of co-payments very shortly within coming weeks. But what is an absolute bottom line is that quarantine will remain. It is one of the most important parts of our ongoing strategy in a world where COVID continues to spread.
The government has budgeted nearly $300 million for quarantining and managed isolation up until the end of the year. However, it might not end up costing that much if co-payments are imposed. Cabinet ministers also agreed to an ongoing surveillance testing regime, both within the community and for those at high risk, for example, working at the border. Residents at Auckland's Stamford Plaza are being threatened with legal action after going public with their concerns about plans for the hotel to be used as a managed isolation facility. Last Friday, Checkpoint revealed that several busloads of the returning travellers would be arriving at the hotel the next day to isolate for 14 days. Permanent residents living in the apartments at the top of the building went public with their concerns, saying shared areas in the hotel meant it wasn't possible to keep residents and isolating guests totally separate. And many of the residents are older and have health issues. Since then, the hotel owner, Stamford Land Corporation Limited, has sent some of the residents legal letters blaming their wrongful interference for the Ministry of Health pulling out of the isolation contract. The letter goes on to say, Stamford Hotel and Resorts has, through your misconduct, suffered substantial damages and losses. We are at the moment quantifying such damages and losses. Take notice that we will be seeking from you the full compensation of such damages and losses, including any legal costs. Residents like this one, who asked not to be identified, say the letters are heavy-handed.
We're very concerned here. We've been told so many different stories and lied to. So we lost all trust out of everybody. So, yeah, it's not very nice.
What is the complaint that the hotel owners have outlined in the letters? What are they saying that residents did wrong here?
We haven't done anything wrong. We just complained about how can they make our place safe if they have people staying there. Because we got a common area that we walk through to get to our cars on levels 3 and 4, and we have to go through the hotel to get to our cars. But we live in above the hotel, and if there's a fire, everybody goes down the same fire escape. How can they seal that off? They can't seal it off. They can't be separated. That's the biggest thing around here. They cannot separate if the virus is downstairs. They cannot separate us from us catching it.
What are you being told about speaking up?
Speaking up, I'll be told not to say too much because they're all getting sued because people are listening in from the hotel.
So you speaking out now, why do you feel strongly enough to do this?
Because if those people come in here, our lives are at risk. I've got family and grandchildren over in Australia. I can't even go and see them. Why? And why should I be put at risk here? You know, we got different hotels in Auckland. They've already been occupied by about 6 or 7 of them. Why pick on this one? You know, I don't just speak for myself. I speak for all the people up here, you know, all my friends and neighbours and everything else, and pregnant women and all sorts of stuff here. They're all at risk. Yeah.
Checkpoint has contacted the Stamford Plaza's management, financial controller and its legal counsel for comment. Our calls and correspondence remain unanswered. Auckland Central MP Nikki Kay is concerned about the rights of those who live there, and she joins me now. What can you do about this?
Well, I actually have a communication that is going to ministers and the Stamford shortly. I am concerned for residents. I think what they are asking for is entirely reasonable to understand what is going on in their building and whether they are going to have people who are isolating, and I think they have every right to understand that. And I think things have escalated. I have, as I say, a communication going to ministers in the Stamford whereby I'm asking that residents get some clear information about what is occurring here.
Have you seen the letters that some of the residents have been sent?
I have seen some of the communications, and I am concerned, and I will be, as I say, dealing directly with the Stamford around this issue. I think there is an obligation on health agencies and the management of the Stamford Plaza to, in a very calm and considered way, let residents know what is going on. Look, I think it was pretty chaotic over the weekend. I was contacted by residents on the Friday night. It was clear there were people going into the Stamford. We then tried to get some clarity. They said that a decision hadn't been made. The next thing we know, at our public meeting on the Sunday to try and talk with residents, that people have been rerouted potentially from Rotorua. So I'm still trying to get to the bottom of this situation. I think the communication has not been good from either health agencies or the Stamford, and I will be fighting for residents to get urgent clarity about what's going on.
How would you describe the tone of the letters to the residents? If you say this needs clear, calm communication, well, what's the tone of the letters that they've been sent?
I think that they have escalated the situation, and it is not helpful in any shape or form, and I have had some very worried residents and people who are involved in the body corporate, and I will be engaging directly with the Stamford to tell them that I think it is entirely reasonable for residents to understand what arrangements may be being put in the building, but I also think that the health agencies need to be very clear when they are engaging with entities that residents have an expectation to know what's going on.
Are the residents being bullied here?
I want to be very careful in terms of...
Why are you worried about getting a letter from the Stamford as well?
Well, what I'm worried about is resolving it as a local MP. That's my job, and if I escalate it further, I don't think it'll be helpful. I think the best thing that I can do is get those agencies and the Stamford to come in and explain exactly what is occurring, and that's what residents deserve, and they have a right to get that.
So I understand you might be looking at communicating with the Ombudsman as well?
That is correct, and I will be having a separate communication with them, and that is a bit wider than just the Stamford. It's worrying me, and obviously there's been some things that have been raised publicly about the management of isolation generally. We have a large number, potentially, of hotels in central Auckland, and I want to make sure, I know that the Ombudsman have said that they are going to be investigating these facilities, but I want to make sure they're doing that sooner rather than later.
So, in terms of the letters from the Stamford to the residents, you say you don't want to ratchet things up. Let me put it another way to you. Do you think that letter was calm and fair?
No, I don't. And I think that's why I have a communication which will go likely in the next 20 minutes to the management and ministers to say it's really important that we urgently are able to have clear information given to residents about what proposals may or may not be occurring and why. And I think that that is the best way to work through this situation.
If the Stamford has indeed lost significant amount of revenue as a result of this contract being pulled, which seems to be the suggestion from the letter, who's responsible for that then? Because ultimately it was the Air Commodore who said he didn't think he wanted to put people in there right now.
Well, again, we're going to have to work through that because there's 3 or 4 basic questions here. The first thing is, was there a contract? If there was a contract, I assume it was between the health agencies and the Stamford. I'm not clear at the moment. I haven't seen a contract, but we had health agencies saying that no decision had been made. So there's clearly a bit of a dispute about what has actually been entered into. The second thing is, if there were arrangements, were they up to scratch? And I think that vulnerabilities have been raised by the body corporate. We need to work through that. The third thing is, then what is the status if there was an arrangement right now and what's the process from here? And I have not as of yet, got clarity, and that's why I'm going directly to the management and to ministers to get that clarity.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Auckland Central MP, Nikki Kay. It is 20 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on that one. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Should the residents be able to express their views publicly and their concerns? Are they responsible for the contract being pulled? And what do you make of the letter that Stamford has sent to some of them? We would love to hear from you. A top epidemiologist is warning that people in Melbourne and across the state of Victoria could be facing another lockdown of up to 2 months. Victoria has had to scrap plans to relax some COVID-19 restrictions because of a spike in cases, and Australia is now fearing a second wave. Our World Watch reporter Max Toll has more.
For 5 days now, new cases of the coronavirus in Victoria have been in the double digits. There were 19 overnight. Cafes, restaurants and pubs were ready to start allowing customers today, but that's now on hold. The federal government has highlighted 6 COVID-19 hotspots in and around Melbourne and is warning people not to travel to those areas where nearly 1 million people live. Australia's Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, says people in those hotspots can still leave their suburbs to go to work or school, but should stay at home as much as possible.
We're not saying people who are already going to work from those areas shouldn't go to work. If you are working from home, you need to continue working from home. So it's an advisory. We're asking people to respect the public health situation and change their behaviour accordingly.
An epidemiologist at the University of Melbourne, Tony Blakely, says health officials have been prepared for breakouts like this.
This was in the pandemic plan that was developed for dealing with COVID, that we may end up in having suburbs or communities going back into lockdown or tighter restrictions than the rest of the state.
But he says people in Victoria should be braced for the worst.
There is a case, as much as I don't want to go back into lockdown, where basically parts of Victoria or even all of Victoria goes back into hard lockdown for 4 to 8 weeks, and we actually have another go at eliminating the virus. So I'm not advocating which way to go here. I'm just raising that there's a very difficult decision at the moment.
Regional leaders say they were taken by surprise by the government's warnings, including the Deputy Mayor of Moreland, Oscar Yildiz.
When I first saw this on social media last night, I thought it was a bit of a joke. There are certainly increasing cases, not just in the city of Moreland. Melbourne actually has 135 cases, the highest number of cases. There's a bit of finger pointing going on, and I don't think it's right to restrict Moreland solely because of the cases yesterday.
He's accusing the government of creating unnecessary hysteria and panic, all because of a few isolated cases. Craig is the owner of a cafe in the town of Gembrook, which lies within another hotspot.
It's going to stop people from coming here, like all the tourists. On the weekend, Gembrook gets packed with tourists, and if they've been encouraged not to come here, well, then that's going to stop, and it's just going to ruin this little town.
Meanwhile, the Queensland Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, says a travel bubble between her state and Victoria is looking increasingly unlikely.
I have concerns about Victoria. The Health Minister has concerns about Victoria. There is a lot of active community transmission happening in Victoria, and I hope that Victoria can get this community transmission under control.
Victorian health officials say most of the new cases in the past week have been transmitted within families. For Checkpoint, Max Toll.
A New Zealand resident in mandatory isolation on Australia's Gold Coast says it seems much stricter there than it is here, and he hasn't had physical contact with another human being for 10 days or breathed fresh air since he transferred hotels. Trevor McEwen's been denied an exemption to visit his dying brother in hospital and is now 10 days into 14 days of isolation. I spoke to Trevor earlier, and he told me after he landed in Australia, he was initially put in a Brisbane hotel where they took away his room swipe card.
They deactivate it. Effectively, you can open the door, but if you step outside, and you'll be locked out of your room, and you can't make the lifts function. So effectively, you're in your room,
and you're trapped on that floor if you step outside of your room.
Correct. Yeah.
So how strict is it other than that? Have you had any human contact since you've been in isolation?
No, it's a lot stricter than New Zealand. In effect, I haven't seen a human being in the whole time that I've been here. Your meals are delivered to your door. They knock on your door 3 times. You've got to wait 10 seconds. You open the door. You bring your meal in. You get a call daily from Red Cross, Australian Red Cross, just checking on your mental health. But in effect, you're in the room for the entire 14 days, and the rooms don't have balconies or windows you can open. So it's been a long time since I've tasted fresh air.
So no exercise even? You're not allowed out for that?
No, there's no. It's not like New Zealand in that respect. No, you cannot leave the room. You've got to do your exercise in the room, which is challenging.
So you say that your meals are dropped off. Do they just do you order food, or does it just turn up and you get what you get?
You get what you get, and I got couscous last night, and people who know me know that's not something that I relish. So, no, you don't get any choice, other than you can tick whether you want a vegan or vegetarian meals, but you just don't know what's coming. And they come 3 times a day, and that's basically it.
What was for breakfast?
Cornflakes and an omelette.
And have you got one of those little peepholes in the door when they drop off the food? Are they dressed in a particular way?
Yes, they've all got face masks. I mean, it's the hotel staff. I guess this hotel here in Surfers Paradise would be the equivalent of the Stamford or something like that. So it's the staff, but very much with face masks on, and if you even open the door while you're there, they ask you to close the door and wait.
So you got moved partway through isolation to a second hotel. How did they transport you?
Well, that was interesting. I was the only person on a probably about a 120-seat bus, other than the driver, obviously. I relished the 10 or 15-second walk of fresh air from the lobby to the bus, but you're escorted by a policeman doing that, and in effect, that's it. Other than that bus driver and the one policeman and the policeman on the Gold Coast who brought me up to my room, that's been the extent of human contact.
Do you have to pay for isolation in Australia?
No, you don't. You don't.
Okay, so it's all covered. So you applied for an exemption because your brother is very ill. We're sorry to hear that. What did they say? They turned you down, didn't they?
Yeah, they're pretty harsh. I mean, look, obviously I'm looking at it from my perspective, so I feel it's pretty harsh given his situation. But one part of me gets it. To be honest, Lisa, obviously sitting in here, you're watching a lot of television, and Victoria's got the second wave. They've had double-digit positive cases for a week now, and they were meant to be relaxing today, and instead they've had to go further into lockdown. And they were initially you're allowed 20 people at your house. That's down to 5. The pubs were all looking to go up to 50 people. They've been taken back down to 10. That's all happened today. So I kind of get it, but I think there haven't been too many lax situations as I've read about over here as opposed to, say, back home. So they're certainly, pretty strict around what you can and can't do. And, so that my compassionate request hasn't been met. So I'm 10 days into my 14 days and really looking forward to getting out on Saturday.
Have you been tested, Trevor?
No, that's the one thing that has surprised me. I anticipated that I might get tested at the airport, and I thought, well, for sure I'll get tested in the hotel. That hasn't happened. I'll be interested to see if I'm tested before I leave. But no, it hasn't even been raised.
So, to the best of your knowledge, are there people other than isolating travellers staying at that hotel that you're at?
No, the entire hotel is quarantined, for overseas travellers. The one in Brisbane was slightly different, but it was 2 wings, and one wing was devoted to travellers, and the other, I think, just to normal guests. So there is a distinct segregation. In this particular one, it's entirely only quarantined people.
And it would seem, Trevor, that on the way home, you'll go back into isolation coming home to New Zealand.
Yeah, it's a little bit dirty reading about some of the stuff that's been going on over there because I was hoping that by the time I come home it might be a little bit more lax. But yeah, it was interesting, obviously in my submission, Lisa, I was pointing out we've had no COVID cases, up until those most recent ones, for some time. I was fit and well, I've had no symptoms, willing to be tested every day, because my request was to be able to self-isolate at my mother's place in Southport. But sympathetic, but at the end of the day, no.
And that is Trevor McEwen, who's in isolation in Australia. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, tributes continue to flow today for slain Constable Matthew Hunt as his family arrives from overseas and his colleagues caught up in Friday's shooting is discharged from hospital. The Warriors are sent reeling after the sacking of coach Stephen Kearney and a tearful homecoming for the community of Redcliffe School today, 9 years after the Christchurch quakes. We would love your feedback, especially if you're listening from managed isolation or quarantine. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A lot of you getting in touch about the issue at the Stamford Hotel. This person says the Quarantine Management Authority should have investigated the facility. Obviously, a mixed model hotel and apartment complex is unsuitable for quarantine. Tony doesn't agree. He says, I used to work at the Stamford there. The residences, whilst built above the hotel, have a completely separate entrance. The apartment's residents are politicking and NIMBYism. Nikki Kay has merely stoked things along. So mixed opinions there. Let us know what you reckon. Text us on 2101. And let's get to the headlines now with Paul.
Thank you, Lisa. The government is toughening up border measures after increasing numbers of returnees have tested positive for the coronavirus. 2 more cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed today, both of them travellers in managed quarantine. Arrivals must submit to testing and medical exams and return a negative test before leaving quarantine. The government's also considering making returnees help cover the cost of their quarantine. The Australian Prime Minister says the latest outbreak of COVID-19 in Victoria is a wake-up call for the country. There's been a surge in cases in the past few days, prompting the government to warn people to avoid travelling to parts of the state. Scott Morrison says Australia is still in the midst of a pandemic. The police officer who survived Friday's West Auckland shooting has been discharged from hospital. A pedestrian who was hit by a car fleeing a routine traffic stop remains in hospital. 2 people have been charged over the murder of Constable Matthew Hunt and will appear in the High Court in 2 weeks. 1 man is dead and another has been taken to hospital after a tractor crash on a Southland farm. Emergency services were alerted to the incident on a rural property at Glenham, about 40 kilometres east of Invercargill this morning. A Palmerston North Medical Centre has been asked to change its processes after failing to diagnose a 6-year-old with acute rheumatic fever. The Health and Disability Commissioner found the Palms Medical Centre breached its duty of care to the girl. And New Zealand Post is building a rugby field-sized super depot in Wellington, which is due to open in 2022. The multi-million-dollar upgrade will double the number of parcels processed to 190 million a year. The Southern Operations Centre in Christchurch will be upgraded, and a new processing centre is also planned for Auckland. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time for the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, Abano Healthcare has withdrawn from sales talks. Why? Because are things looking up for them?
Well, yes, they think they might be looking up for the company. I mean, it couldn't have been much worse after their closure. They're dental clinics. They operate the Lumino, the dentists in New Zealand, and Maven in Australia. So they had to close their practices, and they had been in negotiations with landlords and so forth for rent reductions and other kinds of facilities in the meantime. Look, the businesses are looking up. They managed to reiterate that several times recently. They're saying that they're trading above expectations. So I guess a lot of people have pent up dental work that they need being done. But the $150 million takeover offer, which had been on the table back in March, was removed then as a result of the pandemic. And since then, the company has been in talks with not just this particular bidder, but with others, and has said, look, the proposals they've received over the weekend, for example, I guess they've decided none of them are good enough. They're not going to take the business private. They're not going to sell at the moment. So they're going to still have to look at some kind of restructuring deal and some kind of capital raise. I guess they're needing between $50 and $70 million. And so I guess we're going to hear more from Abano in coming days, weeks, what have you. But yeah, for now, they're saying, look, we're trading above expectations. That's where we're staying, and we're not going to be selling at any cheap price, I guess.
Okay. Why is it that it's thought Canterbury manufacturers are going to be harder hit by the economic recession?
Yeah, so last week we had a big report from Westpac Bank. It was their regional roundup. It was an interesting report, and one of the things in the report was the Canterbury was going to be a harder hit region for manufacturing than others. And it was curious. So I had a chat with the Manufacturers Association in Canterbury, and what's happening there is, the flights that we're not receiving, international flights, have hit Christchurch harder than a lot of, like, even Auckland or perhaps even Wellington. So they're not getting the cheaper or the, potentially bargain cargo rates. So airfares are really expensive out of Christchurch. So that's a big issue right there. So their manufacturers are by and large exporters or manufacturing for the construction sector. And with the downturn in the construction sector, they're getting like a double hit there. So it's
costing them more to get their product offshore to where it needs to go.
Yeah, that's right. And also, and on top of that, their domestic production for the construction sector is also depressed. What they've been doing, though, because, Canterbury's been through an awful lot of upheaval over the past few years, pretty resilient group. And so they're looking at reinventing themselves, restructuring, and so on. So yes, in the short term, for sure, there's going to be some unemployment there in the manufacturing sector. But they're hopeful that with restructuring and coming up with some different innovation, they might be able to keep that sector going. So we'll have to see what happens there. Hopefully, we're going to have some positive stories out of Canterbury before very long.
Well, you're repping the Canterbury colours today for people who are listening, known as in her red and blacks today.
I'm definitely doing it. Yep.
So what has been going on the market today?
Okay, so we fell 0.9%. That's a 96-point drop to 11,158. That's still a pretty strong number for the market. Keeping in mind that the concerns about the coronavirus spreading across the world have been heightened somewhat over the weekend, and so that also puts a damper on economic outlook. So the futures for the United States stock market are down. Asia's going a bit sideways, and so that's what we've seen today. But the New Zealand dollar is more interesting story. We've been down over the weekend, and we came back up again. And partly that's because...
Sounds like the lyrics to a song, Nona. Anyway.
Shall I be singing it? I should actually start a song, because this is like an everyday sort of thing. Up and down, up and down. Okay, yeah, 64.3 US cents, 93.6 cents Australian.
Right.
Now, we dropped a little bit against the Australian dollar because the market was encouraged by some of the comments that the Reserve Bank made there that seemed to think that they were quite comfortable with the level of the dollar, and that the virus there wasn't as bad as they thought it was going to be. So there you go. And the British pence, 51.9.
Still really strong. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. Tributes continue to flow today for Constable Matthew Hunt, the police officer shot dead in Auckland on Friday morning. The 28-year-old was killed and another officer shot in a hail of bullets during a traffic stop in Massey. The surviving officer, who was shot in his leg, was discharged from hospital yesterday, while a pedestrian hit by a car remains in hospital. Annika Smith reports.
3 days after the fatal shooting, the flower wall outside Henderson Police Station continues to grow. Dozens of people have laid bouquets, lit candles and written letters in memorial. One woman who visited this morning with her 3 young children says Matthew Hunt's death is a tragedy.
He went to work every day to support our communities, to make our communities better, to keep our communities safe. He got gunned down, essentially, on what should have been a very normal stop. Nobody should have that happen to them.
She says she was terrified when driving near the scene on Friday as armed police were responding.
I'd been out to the doctors with my youngest, and I didn't know what was going on until it was too late for me to go anywhere but that direction. And it was awful to see just people everywhere, people standing on side, everybody just looked shocked.
Another man paying his respects, Rowan Dowling, says the shooting shows the need for more police to be readily armed.
The people of this police station saved my granddaughter once, and we look after our own, and he was one of our own, and it's a damn shame we couldn't look after him.
A 24-year-old man has been charged with murdering Constable Hunt and a 30-year-old woman with accessory to murder. Both have name suppression and will appear in the High Court at Auckland in 2 weeks' time. Waitemata District Commander Naila Hassan says the death has been felt across the entire police force.
Fortunately, the last death we had in the line of duty was in 2009, so it's been a long time. So the majority of our staff would never have been, thankfully, through anything like this in their career. So it is just such a difficult time.
A second officer, shot in the leg during Friday's shooting, was discharged from hospital yesterday, while a member of the public who was hit by the fleeing vehicle remains in hospital. RNZ understands the second officer was fired upon more than a dozen times with a long-barrelled rifle. The police have confirmed it was a prohibited weapon, but declined to comment on the nature of the injuries as the matter is now before the courts. For Checkpoint, this is Annika Smith.
President Trump's latest rally over the weekend was supposed to reinvigorate his election campaign, but he was instead mocked for a turnout well below expectations. His campaign is now blaming the media and protesters for sabotaging the event held in Oklahoma. The ABC's Barney Potter has more.
It was vintage Trump, and it's generated yet another set of discussion points. There was the overview of his handling of the pandemic.
I have done a phenomenal job with it. I shut down the United States to very heavily infected, but all people from China in late January, which is months earlier than other people would have done it if they would have done it at all. I saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
And there was this reference to an increase in the number of people in the US testing positive.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. They test and they test. We got tests that people don't know what's going on. We got tests. We got another one over here.
White House officials have since insisted the president was merely joking around. Trade advisor Peter Navarro spoke to CNN.
You know, it was tongue-in-cheek. Did the president? Come on now, that was tongue-in-cheek. Please. I don't know that it was. I don't know that it was tongue-in-cheek at all. I know it was tongue-in-cheek. He has said similar things for months. Tongue-in-cheek. He has said similar things for months. But you know what? We got. But he has said similar things for months. That over he's 30 million people unemployed, and we've seen over 100,000 people die because of the Wuhan virus.
Administration officials have also described this presidential reference to Kung flu as another light moment.
Or if you could have heard the reports, oh, it's COVID, it's this, they've gotten, by the way, it's a disease, without question, has more names than any disease in history. I can name Kung flu, I can name 19 different versions of names. Many call it a virus, which it is. Many call it a flu. What difference?
But all the president's messages have almost become afterthoughts as the same aides try to explain away a smaller than expected crowd that reportedly left him outraged. His political team had spent days proclaiming that more than 1 million people had requested tickets. They also ignored health warnings from the White House's own coronavirus task force and Oklahoma officials on large gatherings. But one figure not in dispute today is the US death toll from the pandemic that's now creeping towards 120,000. And the Centre for Diseases Control is warning that as more states ease lockdown restrictions, up to 25,000 Americans could die in the next 3 weeks.
The ABC's Barney Porter there. After the police arrest of a tagger led to his hospitalisation, one barrister says cops should never use force for minor crimes. A video has appeared on Twitter showing a video of Nico Andrews being restrained by 4 police officers in the early hours of Sunday. He says after being spear tackled into a wall and pinned down, scans have revealed damage around his heart. Mediana Johnson reports.
Nico Andrews has been recovering in hospital after being caught by police tagging a wall in Hopetoun Street, Newton.
Just as I was sort of doing it, the paddy wagon pulled up and all those officers just put hats on and charged for me. It actually freaked me out a bit where I went to go and sort of like do a couple of steps instead of running away, I sort of was quite nervous and sort of like trying to cut across and went towards them. I got spare tackled into the wall.
Mr. Andrews says the arrest left him bloody and bruised.
I've had like lumps and bruises all around like through my head, my eye, black eye, like laceration there, like lacerations or my eyebrows, my lips and stuff. I've done a couple of scans and that with inside of my chest. I've got a torn part there. There's like air around my heart and stuff.
He says there was no need for 4 officers to hold him down as he only weighs 65 kgs. South Auckland barrister Kingi Snelger says the action by the officers was not appropriate.
It seems pretty concerning, the behaviour of the police, and I think with the Black Lives Matter movement and more scrutiny on police, we're going to be seeing more of these types of videos.
He says force should never be used for minor crimes.
My view is that we need to stop heavy policing of minor crimes and resulting in mainly Māori entering the justice system and being caught up in that churn. So things like tagging, it just shouldn't be resulting in that kind of force.
Superintendent Karen Malthus says she's confident police acted in an appropriate and professional manner. She says the man fled officers after being seen tagging a wall and violently resisted arrest. The Independent Police Conduct Authority says it is investigating the incident. Former head of the Criminal Justice Advisory Group, Chester Burrows, says there is no one rule for how force is applied.
Very difficult to find an objective measure case by case. If you're asking, how do New Zealand police stack up against other police services around the world, I think we do pretty well. In terms of use of force and our abilities to negotiate, de-escalate, take people into custody without the use of force, I think that's all pretty good in this country compared to others.
However, he says he'd like to see body cams standard across police in order to verify the conduct of both officers and suspects.
I'd love to see it standard because it would show just what the police have to put up with, and it would show just how the police responded. And I know from my own experience that there's a skewed view on both sides and the camera doesn't lie.
Mr. Burrows says while police officers don't always respond perfectly in a situation, context was crucial, and he cautioned against people jumping to conclusions based off the video. For Checkpoint, call Mediana Johnson DNA.
It is about 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're always keen to hear from you, so you can get in touch via text 2101, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. 4 jails failed to give inmates their basic human rights during the COVID-19 lockdown, meaning the prisoners missed out on their minimum 1-hour daily exercise in the open air. The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Bosher, has released a new report based on inspections of units at 9 prisons in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch during Alert Level 3. He found that while prisons responded in a well-resourced, balanced and efficient manner, this came at a cost to the prisoners themselves. Judge Peter Bosher joins me now in our Auckland studio. Good evening.
Good evening, Lisa.
Why were these prisoners being denied what is a basic legal right? That's an hour, just 1 hour, of exercise in the fresh air.
I think what it amounted to was that the prisons found that they were really short-staffed. So when you look at the number of prison staff who were either sick, not available, couldn't come in, had been in isolation because they'd been faced with someone else who might be sick, I think the truth of it was 2 things. Quite complex management, prisoners coming in who are remand prisoners having to remain in their own bubble, staff not as voluminous in number as might be the case. I think the consequence of that was 2 things. 1, at least they kept COVID-19 out, but 2, it came at a cost.
So, is it basically that they could achieve this if they had the right amount of resources, that is more staff?
Oh yes, it's simply a management issue. And I mean, that's what we're here for. Over the years, we have pointed to corrections, I hope constructively, to say, this is what you were doing, but you should do it better, and we suggest ways in which you should do it. Look, with this report, to be fair, it was better than we had expected. I was really worried about what we would find because prison visits had been suspended. Initially, we had difficulty getting our way into prisons. I had a genuine concern. In fact, we found they managed it better than we thought they were going to.
But even saying that, though, and you got maybe a tiny taste of it at level 4, being locked down in your own home, if you are in a prison cell for endless hours a day, that 1 hour is absolute gold to you. So is it acceptable that they were not getting it?
It's not acceptable. And of course, that's only the minimum.
Yeah.
As a general rule, obviously we encourage prisoners, and for the very, very real reason that it's good for the soul and the body to be able to get out of your cell. That's good for the person. It's good for your development, your whole being, your order. So it's not acceptable to not get that. What I've tried to do is modify what might have been a heavy criticism by saying I can understand why they were put in that position, but I do not resile from the fact that this is a minimum standard.
So what are the consequences then?
Well, look, what we try to do in our various reports is to point to practices that we want improved. And it has worked in a couple of important respects, such as some years ago the tie-down beds, which we said you shouldn't do. And Corrections said, well, we have to. That's the only way we can do it. After our report, after our criticism, lo and behold, tie-down beds are now banned. And the same happened in schools where we recommended they stop secluding children with autism. So I think, Lisa, what I'm saying is, initially there's sometimes a bit of pushback, but in fact, providing we keep on and on, often they come our way.
So how many of these prisoners would have been in shared cells as well? So not only do you miss out on your hour outside, you are stuck with a cellmate for an extended period of time as well.
So I don't know the number off the top of my head, to be frank with you, but generally speaking, shared cells are common. So you would expect to find that in this situation, prisoners would have been sharing their space.
So prisoners, you mentioned before, remand prisoners who were being brought in, they were in essence being kept in separate bubbles so that if there were any issues with them, they wouldn't affect other people. So they were in isolation. What effort did these prisons make to give them something to do during that entire time of lockdown?
So I'm slightly concerned that all of that would have suffered as well. However, again, can I be balanced? When I asked my prison inspectors what level of complaints there were from prisoners, because I wanted to value test this on the ground, in fact, there weren't many complaints. The prisoners seemed to understand. I want to just say that the prisoners seemed to know what the COVID-19 level 4 rules were. They seemed to accept it. They seemed to think that the prison staff were making a good effort. So look, I'm wanting to say that this is better than I had expected, where I felt there'd be a lot of complaints by prisoners who hadn't had their minimum standard, but in fact more were understanding of the position than I had expected.
Which were the 4 jails?
We've decided not to name them.
Why not? Because you're basically sitting here arguing to me that sunlight is the solution here. So let's shed some sunlight on it.
I'm going to say that when we started off on these thematic reports, so we've got 3 tranches. I will answer your question, but I've got to do the right thing by those that I inspected. So there are 3 tranches. The mental health facilities report was Monday of last week. Today is the prison report, and then in about a fortnight will be the rest homes report. We had difficulty getting into 2 of those 3 categories. We had difficulty getting into rest homes, some, and we certainly had initial difficulty getting into prisons. The arrangement I came to was that this would be a non-heavy duty inspection. This would be a 6-hour snapshot of each prison.
Have you compromised your position with that then, and then to not name them?
We've compromised the position to the extent that at least we got in, and initially we couldn't get in at all. There's no resiling from the fact that these were not the usual in-depth reports that I do. But I couldn't. I just could not turn up with my normal army of 12 inspectors over 2 weeks. Lisa, it wouldn't have worked.
Will you name them if they don't pull their socks up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I will. And the reason for that is we make, and I'm not just saying that to please you, we do our recommendations, and if they don't follow those up and accept them and implement them, we do a follow-up visit and we say it's not good enough.
We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about these isolation hotels which are being used for people coming back from overseas. You've got some concerns here. Should guests be mingling, should guests be checking into these hotels not knowing that they are isolation hotels?
Well, you see, you've asked me about prisons which I think managed their regimes well. I don't glean from what I've seen that management of the quarantine facilities has been been up to scratch. And I know you haven't got much time, but for my staff to book into a hotel, not knowing that it was going to be used as a quarantine facility, they had the prison inspection the next day, they found out at the last minute and were mingling with those that had come in on a plane. It just put me in the position where I had to abort the carefully arranged prison visit the next day. I felt let down by the system.
So when can we expect the results of your investigation into that?
Well, we are moving with great agility in the office these days, different to the past where things sometimes took a long time. We will get on with the job and start our inspections very soon. I've got to be relevant, so the report will come out very promptly.
Appreciate your time today. Always a pleasure to talk to you. That is the Chief Ombudsman, Judge Peter Bosher, joining me live in the studio. Warriors players and fans are as shocked as the rest of the rugby league community by the sacking of coach Stephen Kearney. The former Kiwis coach was dumped by the NRL side over the weekend, and the news coming the day after the team's 40-12 loss to the Rabbitohs in Sydney. The move leaves the unsuspecting players in the hands of assistant coach Todd Payton, while most fans are feeling dumbfounded at the timing of the decision. Clay Wilson has more.
2 days on, the news of Stephen Kearney's sacking is still fresh for Warriors players. Kiwis forward Tohu Harris says while no one in the squad saw it coming, many were very close with the club's now former coach.
No one really knows what to say other than sort of moving forward. That's the only thing we can do. Don't really know what else to do. It's been a huge shock, and we're still pretty sad by the news. And I feel personally it wasn't deserved.
The players feel that way because of the performance that preceded the stunning dismissal. But the Warriors have also won 2 of their matches since the NRL resumed. A respectable effort, given everything they've been through to be part of the competition. Harris says Kearney, known to most as Mooks, had been the person holding the squad together in trying circumstances.
It's been a couple months now that we haven't seen our families. Mooks has been the person that, spoken to people just to try and get them through each day. So you now got to be able to speak to them. But in the same breath, a lot of us older guys are feeling the same way as them. So, what do you say?
Rugby league followers have been surprised by the decision. Laz Tuigamala says he didn't agree with Kearney being shown the door.
That's a low blow, man. That is a freaking low blow. And I'm not a Warriors fan, but the whole effort of Warriors being there and all this COVID-19 or, just abiding by everything, and then they turn around and axe him after a couple of losses.
Stephen Benfell says the sacking will undoubtedly have an impact on the rest of the Warriors season.
Definitely, yeah, especially they've only just come back, and plus they're over in Australia away from their families and everything, so it'll be incredibly disruptive to have that to deal with and then go into the next match, which is on Friday.
Not all fans are disappointed though. Andrew Hyde says in the end, Kearney's inconsistent record as coach cost him.
Well, he had it coming really, didn't he? Even though it was a shock.
With that abruptness hitting the squad hard, some pundits are questioning whether some players will want to hang around. But Tohu Harris says it's doubtful any will decide to leave the team behind and come home.
I honestly don't know how everyone's feeling in that respect. Everyone still has to be here and work to be able to provide for their families. So that choice, or it's not really a choice, to be honest. It's we just have to do it for our families' livelihoods.
The Warriors don't have long to dwell on Kearney's exit. They face 3-time champions the Storm in Melbourne on Friday night. For Checkpoint, Clay Wilson.
A lot of you have been getting in touch about the issue of isolation and quarantine hotels. This person says, am I alone in thinking it's nuts that taxpayers are covering all the costs for New Zealanders to stay in hotels when they return? Why are they not paying at least half? Weekly taxpayer bill is in the hundreds of thousands. If the residents of the hotel are over 70, they have legitimate concerns. Even so, plans should be communicated and questions answered first. I think I've melded 2 in there together. On the subject of paying for quarantine, Megan Woods gave us some figures last Friday. I think she said we've spent about $81 million so far, and based on the number of people returning, it works out at around $4,000 per person for the 2 weeks isolation. And obviously they're expecting to spend close to $300 million, wasn't it, Pip? I'm just asking my producer. Yeah, close to $300 million. Okay, so the other one was on the subject of the Stamford Plaza. And this is the residents in the hotel apartments there. They're not keen on having isolating guests there. They say it's not possible to keep all the facilities totally separate. Some of them have got legal letters from the Plaza's management. And this person says, I feel for this government, damned if they do, damned if they don't. I hope the National Party will choose to act responsibly, not beat it up and distort the truth for short-term political gain. Nikki Kay seems to be saying the residents have a right to understand if they are safe. I understand if there was to be a fire, but surely the car parking is easily solved. Not many residents put their cars on one floor, and if the isolated people need to use the car park, what for? Not for access to cars. Surely maybe exercise and easily separated. And Henry's got into touch to say, is there a clause in the contracts between permanent residents of the Stamford Plaza Hotel and the management prohibiting residents from airing problems publicly before raising them with management? Don't know the answer to that. If not, the legal letter to those residents who publicly protested the proposal to provide isolation facilities to recent arrivals in the country is outright bullying and an attack on free speech. And the fact that the proposal was cancelled because the hotel did not measure up indicates the protests were valid.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The Prime Minister has unveiled further measures to boost border protection, saying the world is entering a dangerous phase. A new health order makes it clear anyone arriving here must submit to testing and medical examinations and return a negative test before leaving managed quarantine. More than $80 million has already been spent on the border regime. Jacinda Ardern says Cabinet will be considering in the next few weeks whether the people arriving should have to contribute to the costs. And the government expects the number of people entering the country on economic exemptions will continue to be a fraction of all international arrivals. Of the 20,000 recent arrivals, only a few hundred have been those with economic exemptions, such as the Avatar film crew. And the Prime Minister says that number won't grow significantly.
Those individuals pay for themselves, so they are not covered by the Crown. The core costs, some of the health support is, but the core cost of the facilities and the food is paid for by employers, and a very small number.
And Jacinda Ardern says the ban on cruise ships that was due to expire at the end of the month has been extended by 2 or 3 months. The Auckland Central MP Nikki Kay says Stamford Plaza residents should be getting clear information about whether the hotel could be used to quarantine new arrivals. People who live above the hotel have been threatened with legal action after they raised concerns about hotel rooms being used for managed isolation. Ms Kay says the legal threats have escalated the situation and she'll be raising concerns with government ministers and hotel management.
I'm still trying to get to the bottom of this situation. I think the communication has not been good from either health agencies or the Stamford, and I will be fighting for residents to get urgent clarity about what's going on.
The Auckland Central MP Nikki Kay. The Director-General of Health says he's certain the country achieved 24 COVID-free days despite the surge in cases at the border in the past 2 weeks. Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says he's confident the 24-day stretch was achieved because anyone who arrived since March and had symptoms went into a quarantine facility and was tested.
Many hundred were tested. Of those, only 35 returned a positive COVID-19 test, so even amongst the symptomatic. The issue now is, of course, that because of the increase in the number of people that are coming and the acceleration of the pandemic offshore, that is why we are now seeing the cases. So I am confident, and also remembering we had the 14 days quarantine period in place.
Dr. Bloomfield says as of today, the country has 9 active cases of COVID-19, all of them recent arrivals. The police have frozen $140 million believed to be linked to international cybercrime and money laundering. It's the largest restraint in New Zealand history. The money is from the Canton Business Corporation and its owner, Alexander Vinnick, who previously ran a cryptocurrency exchange. The platform stopped trading when the US government seized its website in 2017. The police say the platform's total lack of controls meant criminals laundered proceeds through illegal means such as computer hacking, ransomware attacks, theft, fraud, corruption and drug crime. Vinnick was arrested in Greece in 2017 and extradited to France, where he remains in custody. An independent report into how prisons were run during lockdown has found their response to COVID-19 came at the expense of prisoner rights. The The Chief Ombudsman has released a report based on inspections of units at 9 prisons in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch during Alert Level 3. Peter Boshier found prisons responded in a well-resourced, balanced and efficient manner, but this came at a cost to the prisoners. He says inmates in 4 prisons did not receive access to at least 1 hour of fresh air every day, which contravenes the Corrections Act. The Ombudsman says the Department of Corrections has accepted all of his recommendations for change. North Korea says it will fly 12 million propaganda leaflets across the border into South Korea using 3,000 large balloons. Pyongyang says the venture is in response to anti-North Korean groups in the south, sending propaganda into the north. Bruce Harrison reports from Seoul.
According to North Korean state media, Seoul has failed to stop North Korean defectors and other activists from sending propaganda across the border. Pyongyang says it's a violation of a summit agreement the two sides reached in 2018 to build peace. North Korea says it will soon be dropping the leaflets deep into the south. Images of the leaflets appeared in the North state media. They carry slogans criticizing the South Korean president, and one bag for delivery south had even been filled with cigarette butts. Bruce Harrison, Seoul.
The Commerce Commission has fined an Invercargill company nearly $200,000 for lying about its health supplements. Gateway Solutions Limited, formerly known as Silberhorn Limited, sold deer velvet supplements which contained a lot less of the active ingredient than was described on the packaging. The judge ruled Ian Carline deliberately hid information from customers on about $5 million worth of goods. He was also fined $6,800 for failing to produce documents to the Commerce Commission. 5 minutes past 6. On to sport now. The new Wallabies coach Dave Rennie has dismissed suggestions he threatened to leave the job if former CEO Raylene Castle was sacked. Castle stepped down from the role in April after coming under pressure for Rugby Australia's poor results on the field and financial struggles off it. Australian media reports claim former Chiefs coach Rennie was ready to walk away if Castle left. He says he would have loved to have worked with Castle. However, he says he was always committed to coaching the Wallabies.
I was really looking forward to working with Raylene. Look, I rate her high character and tough. I was incredibly disappointed. I would have loved to work with her, but I've signed. I'm committed. So look, no, I wasn't going to walk away.
Dave Rennie is confident as many as 4 Bledisloe tests between the Wallabies and All Blacks will be able to be held this year, but he's unsure when, and he has slim hopes the Rugby Championship, which involves South Africa and Argentina, will go ahead at some point in 2020. The Northern Stars were blown off the court by the Central Pulse in their first ANZ Premiership netball game back after lockdown, going down by 24 goals last night. Stars defender Storm Purvis says her side won't put on a repeat performance against the Mainland Tactics tonight. And the Stars and Tactics game starts at 7 o'clock. That's the news.
Coming up this week on Nights, Amy Fletcher on the danger of deep fakes, using digital technology to create fake posts so convincing you think they're the real deal. But if anything can be faked, how can we tell what's real anymore? And stranded in paradise, Amelia Lawley talks about the migrants stuck on Waiheke Island because of the COVID-19 border closures, many of whom are sleeping in their vans and cars. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, this week after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
We are funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now from Met Service, taking us to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday. Northland and Auckland, that's north of the city, cloudy periods, a few showers. The remainder of Auckland, also western areas from Waikato to Wellington, fine apart from cloudy areas around Wellington for the rest of today. Coromandel Peninsula, cloudy periods, isolated showers. Bay of Plenty in the central high country, fine, cloudy periods from tomorrow afternoon. There's the chance of a shower or two about Tauranga. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy, showers becoming isolated tomorrow afternoon. Waited Upper, mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle clearing up tomorrow afternoon. For Nelson, fine and clear for the rest of today. Areas of cloud tomorrow. Coastal Marlborough and Canterbury Plains from Ashburton northwards, mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle. For the rest of the South Island, mostly fine, low cloud or fog in some inland valleys. Cloudy periods for coastal Southland from tomorrow afternoon with patchy rain. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a shower or two. 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The government is ramping up its border control measures amid 2 new positive cases today, both at quarantine hotels in Auckland. One is a teenage woman who arrived from Pakistan and was on the same flights from Doha and Melbourne as another confirmed case. The other case is a man in his 30s who has returned from India, again on the same flight as another confirmed case, and he's staying at the Grand Millennium. Ben Strang has more.
The 2 new cases mean there are now 9 active cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand in what the Ministry of Health is essentially treating as the second coming of the coronavirus. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says with the period of no new or active cases earlier this month, New Zealand hit the reset button on the pandemic. New infections that are coming from those arriving at the border are treated as a new wave, and Dr. Bloomfield is confident the virus won't spread into the general population. He says the ministry is working hard to track everyone who has been in contact with those who test positive, and that includes the 2 women who arrived from Britain and left isolation before being tested.
For the 2 women who arrived back from the United Kingdom and were in the Novotel Ellerslie, everybody in the hotel at the time was tested and have returned a negative test. Likewise, we've followed up all the staff, 183 who had worked there during the period they were there, and all the health staff, which is over 50, have been tested and tested negative. They're the ones who would be most likely to be in closer interaction with the women. And of all the other staff, they've been followed up and referred for testing, bar 11, whom we're working with the hotel on still, who have not worked in this last period.
Dr. Bloomfield was quizzed about the testing of those who were granted compassionate leave from quarantine facilities earlier this month. He says between the 9th and the 16th of June, 55 people were given an exemption and allowed out into the wider world to visit a dying relative or to attend a funeral.
Of those 55, 54 have been followed up and have either been tested and returned a negative test. That is 50 of them. And then there are 4 who are children where it was deemed not appropriate to take a test for a range of reasons, but their family members have been tested and tested negative.
Dr. Bloomfield also addressed the increasing number of cases this past week, when for 24 straight days New Zealand didn't register a single new case of the virus. That was despite hundreds of people coming into the country and going through managed isolation, although without the need for testing. He said he's confident none of those passengers were infected with COVID-19, and these latest cases are a reflection of what's happening across the globe.
I just want to reiterate that part of the reason we are finding people now that may not have symptoms or may be early in their infection is because we are doing the testing, and of course we have got much more infection happening globally, and we're seeing people coming back from places like India and Pakistan, even the UK, where they have got wider infections.
The number of people coming back to New Zealand is only increasing, and that means officials are having to find places to put them. The government has budgeted nearly $300 million for quarantining and managed isolation up until the end of the year. However, it might not end up costing that much if co-payments are imposed. In the coming days, more than 900 people are expected to re-enter the country, putting a strain on the number of hotels the government is using for quarantine. Over the weekend, busloads of people were driven from Auckland to Rotorua to enter isolation at hotels there. Rotorua Mayor Steve Chadwick says she was told of the move on Friday.
I've asked for assurances that the protocols will be in place, and I've been assured that the operation will be watertight. So that wasn't from government, it was from the agency leading this exercise.
And so what's the feedback been like from the residents of Rotorua?
Well, actually a lot on social media. Not one phone call, funnily enough, but our council customer service centre is getting a lot of calls. So we're making sure that in our response it's coordinated with the military and their message, and also with our district health board about how this managed isolation is being carried out.
There have been suggestions that more towns or cities could be added to the list of quarantine sites as capacity nears breaking point. But over the coming weeks, Housing Minister Megan Woods says there is enough room for those coming into the country.
Currently, we have a capacity of 4,607 beds or spaces for isolation, and we have 4,148. So we've got a bit of headroom in that. That Air Commodore Webb and I have been tracking very closely the ins and outs over the next couple of weeks and matching that very much to supply. And that we are confident that we have capacity through that period of time.
If the number of beds was stretched, bringing back the caravans which were used by those returning from Wuhan early in the pandemic has been touted as a possibility. But the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says it's a last resort.
We've got other options first. I was speaking with Minister Woods and Air Commodore Webb before our press conference, just talking about the extra facilities that are available in the existing centres we are already using that will bring on additional capacity. We've favoured those facilities to date because they provide us the best opportunity to ensure the safety of the community and the safety of those who are within them. So that capacity is growing as we see the extra flights that are coming through, so we're confident that we have the capacity in the system that we need.
Jacinda Ardern says the government has reissued its COVID-19 health notice and as part of that has reiterated the need for those coming into the country to submit a negative test for the virus before leaving quarantine. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
Meanwhile, a man who arrived back in New Zealand to be with his dying father has described a hellish 4 days confined to an Auckland hotel room with no opening windows. Chris Tunbridge is staying at the Ellerslie Hotel that previously hosted 2 women who tested positive for COVID-19 after leaving managed isolation early on compassionate grounds. Tunbridge says COVID-19 tests only started at the hotel after that breach. Guests were then locked in their rooms for the best part of a week. Chris Tunbridge told our reporter Nick Trubridge those isolating at the hotel were only allowed out over the weekend.
Thankfully, on Saturday night at 6 p.m, that was basically 4 days after, we were able to once again venture outside into the car park, and yesterday and today resumed our 3.5k walks around the car park. So that certainly helped lift our spirits, I can tell you that.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but from when those 2 women were found to be positive up until Saturday, you were effectively locked down in the true sense of the word.
Yeah, in fact, on Tuesday, we were outside getting some fresh air at 6 o'clock, and the police ordered us to our rooms. Okay? So from 6 o'clock Tuesday to 6 o'clock Saturday, we were confined to our rooms and told not to leave our rooms. And, we previously... we had housekeeping coming past our door. We had to then order and request, anything that we needed. We could no longer sort of order a coffee from downstairs, that sort of thing. So, we were restricted somewhat at that time.
How were people feeling about that? I mean, obviously you didn't see anyone until you were allowed out again, but what was your sense of how people were feeling?
New Zealanders are generally quite placid, quite complacent, and we want to do the right thing, but because of the way we are, we don't often speak out. But I really made it known to the Ministry of Health representative that, I was very unhappy that I was being confined to my room because of their mess up.
You said your room didn't have windows.
I've got a window, but it's I can't open it. So I really am living with air conditioning, and I've never really enjoyed air conditioning because, in my mind, it's air conditioning that breeds some of these types of germs.
Describe those 4 days in your room.
As I said, attitude is everything, and you've just got to keep a positive outlook. And through social media, we're able to keep in touch with family and friends. I was still working in the evenings on my businesses, and I was fortunate, unlike a lot of other people here, that I had my brother in the same bubble, that he could come and visit me in my room. So we were able to, share our meals together and, have chats, which helped pass that time. But I don't think so many people here were so fortunate. And, some of the rooms I think are better than others. And, if you had a window that looked out onto a concrete wall 1 metre from your window, then I think, and you're on your own, you could feel very depressed. So I heard on the news this morning that, the family of the slain policeman have travelled over from Australia to New Zealand, and now they're required to quarantine for 2 weeks. And personally, because of the screw up from the Ministry of Health, this family aren't able to mourn with each other and give comfort and solace to each other at this time. And quite frankly, I think they should be able to, as long as they all on arrival get their COVID test, get the results in 24 hours. There should be no reason why they can't quarantine at home in self-isolation in their own bubble. But because of this mess up from last week, the government's now made this blanket decision about, well, no one gets compassionate leave anymore, and yet really they've just shot themselves in the foot, because there are genuine reasons for people to request it and have that granted. And really, if they are, as I said, COVID tested and get a negative result, why can't they self-isolate with their family at home? It's just ridiculous.
And that's Chris Tunbridge talking to our reporter Nick Trubridge. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The UK's top security agency, MI5, says the man arrested on suspicion of stabbing 3 people to death in the city of Reading over the weekend was already on their radar. Detectives investigating the attack say it was a terrorist attack, but that they believe the man was working alone. The BBC's Daniel Sanford reports.
The moment when specialist firearms officers raided a flat in Reading last night. Whoa! Just over a mile from where 3 people were stabbed to death in the worst police-designated terrorist attack in Britain for 3 years. It was the home of Khairi Sadala, a Libyan asylum seeker with possible mental health problems, who briefly came to the attention of MI5 last year, but was not considered a genuine risk or immediate threat. He's suspected of attacking groups of complete strangers enjoying a summer evening in Forbury Gardens, right in the town centre, at around 7 o'clock yesterday evening. A group of men was targeted first.
He darted round anti-clockwise the circle, got one, went to another, stabbed the next one, went to another, stabbed the next one. I still thought it was a scuffle, but I was watching because I didn't want to get involved in anything. I was just watching, and then he stood up and I saw a massive knife in his hand, probably at least 5 inches minimum, and then he turned and started looking towards us, and that's when I just started shouting, "Run!" And I heard a lot of screams in the park. A lot of people realised and started running away.
One of those killed was 36-year-old James Furlong. He was head of history at the Holt School in Wokingham, which wrote in a letter to parents that James was a very kind and gentle man. He had a real sense of duty and cared for each and every one of our students. Words cannot describe our sadness at this time.
I'm appalled and sickened that people should lose their lives in this way. If there are lessons that we need to learn about how we handle such cases, how we handle the events leading up to such cases, then we will learn those lessons.
This morning, as a huge investigation got underway, police formally declared it as a terrorist attack, though detectives think their suspect was acting alone.
From our inquiries undertaken so far, officers have found nothing to suggest that there was anyone else involved in this attack. And presently, we are not looking for anyone else in relation to the incident.
Neighbours here at the block of flats where Khairi Sadala lived have told us that he had caused problems in the past. He once threw a TV out of the top floor window, and he was regularly visited by a mental health key worker. Kieran Vernon told me that the man he knew showed no signs of extremism or violence and had rather been someone to smoke cannabis with.
He seemed like me or you. I mean, whenever we used to meet up, we used to all talk about drinking whiskey and how different ganja affects the different thinking of mind. Like some makes you sleepy, some makes you happy, some makes you grumpy and stuff like that. And that's pretty much all we'd chat about. It's just a normal, genuine guy.
As the bodies were taken for post-mortem examinations, their families remembered 3 much-loved men. And as darkness fell, the police continued the meticulous counter-terrorism investigation into the savage attack in which the 3 friends died.
That report from the BBC's Daniel Sanford. It was a tearful homecoming of sorts for Te Raukura Redcliffe School this morning, 9 years after the Christchurch quakes forced it out of its original location. The school's been rebuilt, not on the same spot, but back in its neighbourhood, after a dogged fight from locals who were originally told it would be shut down altogether. Over the years, the school's been bumped around 3 different locations, and many of its students have come and gone on to high school. But this morning, more than 200 eager kids, whānau and teachers were at the gates of their new campus almost a decade on. Earlier I spoke to Principal Rose McInerney and asked how it felt to be on the new grounds.
Oh, it's unbelievably exciting. Everyone was just bursting at the seams to come in the gate this morning. And we had a lovely mihi whakatau to welcome everyone into the school. And now I'm just wandering around and the kids' faces just say it all, really. They can't believe it. It's very cool.
What does it mean to you?
Oh, it's a tremendous amount to me. It's been a really long journey of 9 years. Certainly lots of highs and a few lows, I guess. And so to get to this point where all of the hard work is paying off, and not just me, but a huge amount of people that have done the work to get us to this point, it means a tremendous amount. I'm very proud.
So you're at a different location. Does it feel like a homecoming, though?
Oh, definitely, because we've been outside of our community for these whole 9 years. We've had 3 different locations that we've worked at and taught from to make our school keep humming. So to be back in our own suburb, just a walk or a bike ride away, and I could see that this morning, the children all biking and scootering, and it just warmed my heart that and the parents will just be able to come to the gate and talk, and that's what we've really missed because they've been bussed around the corner, 10 or 15 minutes away. So to be back in our own community, it's just incredible.
Because it's been so long, Rose, some of the kids that you had in your school wouldn't be there to see this day because they've moved on. They're older now. Are there some families who have still other kids there?
That's right. So quite a few of them actually came today to just have a look, and a lot of them are coming back to our grand opening on Thursday because they just feel so a part of the community and so a part of this very special journey. But yes, there's definitely families who've got older children in secondary school who still have children here with us. So, those families that have been around for a long time really know the full extent of the journey. But all our new families are very, very appreciative of the work that's been done by past boards and all of the parents just staying so loyal and sticking with us through the tough times and the uncertainty.
So as you cruise around today, what's the best bit?
I just think the children's faces. Sometimes when things were really hard, I just thought, when we get that day where we're all back, I'm going to get to see their excited little faces. And honestly, there's not one of them that doesn't look excited. They are just so happy trying everything out and telling me how much they love it and walking around saying thank you, just so appreciative and happy to be home. So I think that's my biggest thing. We had a very special moving mihi whakatau where people spoke and sung, and we got gifted a beautiful school haka. So actually nearly all of the community joined in with that. So that was very, very powerful. And we'll do that again on Thursday when we have Jacinda and Dave Dobbin come to hang out with us for a couple of hours. So, really, we're a very musical school. So having that, I think music just makes the world go round. And it's certainly helped us through some tough times anyway.
A few tears this morning, Rose?
It's fair to say. I told the children I was going to try not to cry when I spoke, and I did try. A few tears, yeah.
I imagine some of the parents would be pretty emotional about it as well.
Very. I think we almost had every single parent there, and grandparents and neighbours, and it was just wonderful. It was, highly emotional, very, very special. The beginning of us being home, words can't express how special this is, I think, for our community.
Rose, did you ever think about giving up, if you're honest?
If I'm honest, I had moments when things were hard where I thought about giving up, but we have a very resilient community and there was no way I wanted to give up. A moment like all of us, we're just human. Just keep going and I've had lots of support to make sure that didn't happen. So, very, very proud to be back.
And that's Principal Rose McInerney there. India now has the fourth most cases of COVID-19 in the world, and just yesterday the country experienced its biggest daily spike. There are about 410,000 official cases in India and about 13,000 deaths, but some frontline health workers say the numbers are being underreported. The BBC's Yogita Lamai reports.
They're always on the go now. For decades, Jitendra Singh Shanti has been carrying the dead from hospitals to crematoriums in Delhi. But as India battles the coronavirus pandemic, he says they're witnessing an unprecedented situation. I've not seen such a scary period in my life. We used to transport about 5 bodies a day for cremation. But now that's increased to 25. The situation in Delhi is really bad, he says. From the country's graveyards, crematoriums and hospitals, there are accounts that the real number of people who've died of coronavirus is higher than official data. Frontline doctors from different parts of India have told the BBC there are many who are not being counted. They didn't want to be identified, fearing reprisal from the government.
There is a massive underreporting in Delhi. In our isolation ward, 45 people have died in the past 3 weeks, out of which only 7 were tested. We don't know if they had COVID or not, but they definitely showed the symptoms.
The deaths are happening because of coronavirus, but they show the patients died of comorbidities like hypertension or diabetes.
And that's the BBC's Yogita Lamai with that report. And in New Zealand, we've had 5 cases caught at the border in the last week of people who were travelling back to New Zealand from India. Let's get to a bit of your feedback before we go on isolation. Peter says isolation is better in Australia. Remember, they've had plenty of practice with detention centres. Greg says Australia is apparently stricter with isolation. In my view, they're cruel and inhumane, but they don't COVID test people. It seems we do here. So who's really stricter? And this one from Terry, Australians are running quarantine as it should be run. New Zealand needs to be just as strict. Mark says Australia has had those strict quarantine rules in place since March 29th. That illustrates how slack and slow New Zealand policy has been. And this one says the people in quarantine need to harden up. They choose to come back. They need to play by the rules and quit moaning. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Border control measures are to be beefed up after another 2 COVID-19 cases were confirmed today, both new arrivals in quarantine. The Chief Ombudsman has found prisoners' rights were breached over access to fresh air during lockdown. The Auckland Central MP Nikki Kay is taking up Stamford Plaza residents' concerns about the hotel being used to quarantine new arrivals. And police have frozen $140 million believed to be linked to international cybercrime and money laundering. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
A lot of us, especially the elected representatives of this area, we work a lot with our local police. They're like part of our family.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
That's really exciting. We have the next single coming out next week with a video which is comprised of tour footage from the last year,